The anxious generation. The surge of suffering.
I've been hearing a lot about how smartphones and social media are affecting kids today. It seems like anxiety is on the rise among adolescents.
Absolutely, I feel that too. It's like every conversation I have with other parents turns into a debate about screen time.
Right? I read that over 35,000 adolescents reported feeling overwhelmed by social media pressures last year. That's a staggering number.
It's heartbreaking. I know a mother who shared her struggles with her daughter's mental health due to Instagram. It's like a constant battle.
And it's not just girls. I met a father whose son, who has mild autism, became withdrawn after getting a gaming console during the pandemic. It changed his behavior dramatically.
That's so concerning. It seems like parents feel trapped, trying to balance their children's social lives with their mental well being.
Exactly. Many parents feel powerless, especially when taking away devices leads to withdrawal symptoms in their kids.
I've heard similar stories where families feel like they have to choose between social isolation for their kids or letting them have unrestricted access to technology.
It's a tough situation. Studies show that excessive screen time can lead to increased anxiety and depression among adolescents, which is alarming.
I can see how that could happen. It's like the more connected they are online, the more disconnected they become in real life. The wave begins.
It's alarming to see how adolescent anxiety and depression have surged in recent years, especially since 2010.
Absolutely, I read that major depressive episodes among teens began to spike around 2012, which is quite concerning.
Yes, and the increase was particularly pronounced among girls, with rates rising about 150% since then.
That's significant. And it's not just isolated to one demographic, it's happening across all races and social classes.
Exactly. In fact, by 2020, 1 in 4 American teen girls had experienced a major depressive episode in the previous year.
That statistic really puts things into perspective. What's even more troubling is that the trend continued to worsen into 2021.
Right, the data shows that the lines on the graph tilt more steeply after 2020, indicating worsening mental health.
It's fascinating yet frightening to think about the factors contributing to this crisis, like social media and societal pressures.
Indeed, those are complex issues. The rise in mental illness has many causes, including childhood experiences and sociological factors.
It's crucial that we understand this phenomenon, especially since it seems to have affected Gen Z and late millennials more than older generations. The nature of the surge. Our research shows that this surge is concentrated in internalizing disorders, where emotions like anxiety and fear are felt inwardly.
That makes sense. So, it's more about how they cope with their feelings?
Exactly. Girls and women generally suffer higher rates of internalizing disorders, while boys and men tend to have externalizing disorders, like anger and risk taking.
Interesting. But I've also heard that both genders are experiencing more anxiety and depression lately.
That's right. Since the early 2010s, both sexes have shown increases in internalizing disorders, especially anxiety and depression.
What about the age groups? Are certain ones affected more?
Yes, the surge is particularly concentrated in Gen Z, with some spillover to younger millennials. Data shows a sharp rise in feelings of nervousness starting in 2014. What is anxiety? Anxiety is often related to fear but isn't the same. It's more about anticipating future threats rather than responding to immediate danger.
That makes sense. I read that anxiety rates have risen significantly among adolescents recently.
Yes, a study in Wisconsin showed anxiety among high school students increased from 34% in 2012 to 44% in 2018, especially among girls and LGBTQ teens.
Wow, that's a big jump. And what about college students?
In 2023, a study found that 37% of college students reported feeling anxious always or most of the time. That's alarming.
It really is. So, what happens to the body when someone experiences anxiety?
Anxiety can manifest physically as tension, discomfort in the chest, or even abdominal pain. It also leads to emotional feelings of dread and worry.
That sounds exhausting. How does it affect one's thinking?
For many, anxiety can lead to cognitive distortions like catastrophizing or black and white thinking, which can create a vicious cycle of worry.
What are the main symptoms of major depressive disorder?
The key symptoms include a depressed mood and a loss of interest in most activities. These must be present for at least 2 weeks for a diagnosis.
That sounds really tough. What else should we know about it?
Often, physical symptoms accompany depression, such as significant weight changes, sleep disturbances, and fatigue.
Wow, that really highlights how serious it can be. What about social connections?
Absolutely. Social disconnection can increase the likelihood of depression, creating a vicious cycle where depression reduces the desire for social interaction.
That makes sense. I've heard that childhood experiences can impact this too.
Yes, a play based childhood can strengthen friendships, while a phone based childhood often weakens them. It's not real, is it? Many experts were initially skeptical about the rise in adolescent anxiety and depression, thinking it might be a moral panic around technology.
Really? That seems surprising given how much we hear about it nowadays.
Absolutely. One psychiatrist even argued that self reported data doesn't necessarily reflect real changes in mental illness rates.
That makes sense. But what about the actual numbers? Are more teens seeking help?
Yes, studies show that emergency psychiatric care for adolescents has increased significantly, especially for self harm cases.
That sounds alarming. How much has it increased?
From 2010 to 2020, the rate of self harm among young adolescent girls nearly tripled.
Wow, that's a huge jump. What about older girls or boys?
For older girls, the rate doubled, while boys generally have higher suicide rates, but attempts and self harm are more common among girls.
So, there's a clear pattern here. What do you think triggered these changes?
It's unclear, but the data suggests something significant shifted for preteen and young teen girls in the early 2010s.